Julian White, welcome to the podcast.
Hello.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. Yeah, I'm fine, thank you. Yeah,
Good, good.
it's the weekend, so it's no working, and just I went to a really good exhibition today, and yeah, it was good.
Cool. What did you go see?
I went to see a Belgian artist called Leon Spilly Art, and he's quite an interesting character from nine. He died 90. Oh, he died. Well, he was around the turn of the century, contemporary with James Ensor. Quite melancholic, very beautiful, very graphic work. Quite interesting. I didn't know anything about him actually. He did landscapes, and then he did always pictures of people were always with their heads turned or their backs. It's quite interesting. We were talking about the psychological, what that's about, whether it's an ability to draw people's faces maybe, or it's just that he found that the back of people is more interesting than the front. And there's obviously something about rejection and melancholy and all that kind of stuff, but really beautiful and kind of sad.
Yeah, actually really interesting. It is a
Mm,
specific style. I know a photographer in Montreal who does the
mm,
same. She
yeah,
photographs only the back of
yeah,
people.
yeah,
So that is definitely interesting.
yeah.
Julian, you're a gaffer in the film
I
industry.
am, I am.
So yeah, and I think most people outside of the film industry aren't really familiar with
No,
that
sure.
term. So can we start by having you maybe just tell us what a gaffer is, what a gaffer
Well,
does?
Gaffer in the film industry is a chief lighting technician, so we look after the whole lighting department and work with the cinematographer in creating a look and the mechanics of lighting a movie, really, or a TV series or a commercial or whatever. But and then the word gaffer is obviously the meaning just a senior person, but it for some reason it's stuck in the film industry as a colloquial term. So that's me.
And how long have you been doing it?
To weirdly, I thought it was a very short time, but it's 22 years.
That's not short at all.
No, I know, but I kind of go, oh, I'm only just starting out, and and that's quite a nice thing in a way. But also, I spoke to somebody who went, oh, we haven't seen you for ages. Actually, there was a focus puller, first assistant cameraman on the commercial I'm doing this week, and I said, oh, you were my first electrician when we first did a commercial. And I said, when was that? And he goes, probably 98, and I was like, oh wow, that really kind of blew my mind a little bit. I was like, wow, that seemed like A, that was yesterday, and B, it just I don't know, 22 years is a long time. It's old enough to have be a grandfather, if you know what I mean. And,
Yeah, totally.
that's a generation, isn't it, almost? So, yeah, I was kind of blown away by that. But, yeah, 22 years. And I think in the last 10
And
years, it's probably I've gone from doing low budget stuff and more serious, bigger productions. And, I still do them, but now I'm sort of established, so I guess the word would be.
yeah, that's actually what my next point was, is
Mm,
that in 22 years, like,
mm,
you have established, quite the portfolio. You've worked on
mm,
Game of Thrones, The Martian,
yep,
you've worked on Midnight at the Orient Express, a
yep,
whole lot of big,
yep,
large budget
yes,
productions.
yeah, and
Do
small as
you
well
have a
and stuff.
preference?
Well,
Do you have a preference
I
in terms
guess
of what you like to do?
it's like a snack or it's like a big meal. One takes longer to make. There's probably more anticipation that it's going to be amazing, that it's all, and then when you eat it, you go, well, yeah, it was okay. So it's a different thing. And I think actually sometimes the smaller bite-sized tapas meals can be much more interesting because you don't have to worry about them so much. They're less anticipation and, it's just impromptu, harder maybe in a weird way. But no, there's a difference in longevity, stress, I guess, politics, definitely. I think the lower budget ones seem to have more of a familial attitude, so they're more kind of like, "Yeah, we can do it," against all the odds, which can be stressful and also tiring because 'cause you're doing longer hours and there's more anticipation of it, that you not anticipation, more, it's like pushing the boulder. The boulder's slightly bigger and it's a steeper hill, um, and you have less, what you make up in what you don't have in money, you have to make up in strength and time or stamina and time, so that's a different thing. As you get older, you're a bit
Do you
like, "Yeah,"
find
you know?
do you find it advantageous to sometimes take a break from the larger productions and work on smaller ones so that
Y
you kind of get the creativity
Yeah,
flowing?
absolutely, and also the energy of the motivation of why you're doing it, because obviously money is a big motivator for a lot of people, but if you haven't got that, do you still wanna do it, And I think that actually, you know what? Years ago, I heard well, not years ago, 5 years ago, I heard a great thing about the word amateur, and, traditionally, the word amateur is seen as being like, "Yeah, you're such an amateur," but actually, the word amateur comes from love, amatore, and it means that you love doing it. And I think that's quite nice. It's like, well, you're an amateur, but it means because you're not professional, you're not paid for it necessarily. And I think there's truth in both. It's good to be paid for what you do and reap the rewards of what you sow, but also sometimes you're doing it for the love of something else, and that's quite nice. So you have to. I think it's finding a balance, really. And my favorite film that I've probably done is Control, which is not a big budget, very hard work, but I felt that we were all in the same boat at the same time, and there wasn't this kind of like Well, I'm the producer, I'm the director, you don't, you're not in the we're in the you're in the raft, we're in the life dinghy. We get the rations. So there's a bit more of a balance, more democratic, and more meritocracy, I think. And you see people blossoming. You see people who've never been on a movie set before, just going, "Wow, this is amazing," and blossoming. And then you meet them 10 years later, and they're doing something amazing. You think, well, you know what I mean? It's like a nursery, and that can be quite nice. But having said that, it's difficult and it's tiring because you have to make up for all
Right.
the experience and the inexperience of other people. You have to kind of cajole them, explain to them, to be like, oh, we haven't got that, so we need to do this. And it's like your brain has to work harder, you physically have to work harder. But it's the reward sometimes be much greater. And I think, like the meal thing is that you can cook a quick meal and everybody goes, wow, that was amazing. And you can slay for hours over a dish. And people go, yeah, it's good. And I think that sometimes that the finding the balance between that is the thing. So I guess it depends what you're in
Ho
it for.
how
I
long
think.
True.
Mm.
How long did it take you to get your footing in the business?
Well, I had no anticipation of going anywhere, so I didn't. It seemed like it was very quick. I think if I'd probably wanted to go to film school and really wanted to be in the film industry, I would have found that quite difficult. But it happened 3 years, maybe 2 years. I don't know. That's the thing. It's difficult. It just seemed to get. It just seemed to. I just seemed to be at the right place at the right time, and I worked on stuff that was really interesting, and I every day was exciting. So it kind of, the time went very quickly. And I think maybe it then took, I went through stages, and maybe it's 5 or 6 or 10 years into it, it was a bit like, eh, you felt like you're treading water. Then you move up to the next level, and then you go on to the bigger films, and then and then people start seeing you as a senior technician, and you just have a different attitude. And then you realize that all the people who you started out with were, low budget filmmakers, are now in the positions of power in Netflix. And so do you know what I mean? It's like your peers are in that same position, and you kind of go, oh, people are treating me with respect. I think that's the thing actually, is I still see myself as like a fledgling filmmaker, and in reality I'm
Mhm.
not. And maybe that's not a bad thing. Keeping it
Uh,
real, as I say.
Crazy question.
Mm,
One thing I don't know about, crew members, I know that there are unions, but do gaffers
mm.
have agents?
We don't, but you can do. But it's not. The thing is, it depends. Traditionally we would come through recommendation of another cinematographer, or a collaboration you've built up over time, or a recommendation through a producer, or somebody's coming into London, they need a gaffer, and somebody say, "Hey, that guy's great." So an agent really doesn't help. An agent for us would be more trying to sort out the deal rather than finding the work. But the movie
So
I'm just doing, I got through an agent of a cinematographer. He said, "Oh, I'm looking for a guy. Do you know anybody?" He said, "No, I know people because he used to work. I know him from lighting days." And so he put us two together. So he acted as my agent, but unpaid in that sense. But in a way, he's doing his job on the other end, if you see what I mean. So no, we don't technically have agents. We don't need them.
Right, okay.
So
And so I guess really there is a game played for somebody
yes,
who's young in the industry,
yeah,
and it is half work ethic and half networking, really.
yes. Yeah, and luck. I think like a lot of things, you may have talent, you may be a very qualified electrician, but you just seem to not get to the right place. And then attitude's a big thing. So, you can just fit in. I think it's like anything. I think it's a bit like a sports team, like a basketball team or something. You're just at the right, you're like, hey, this guy's good. And then you grow and you find your position, and then people like you and they pass the ball, and then you get the shot, and everybody's like, yeah, you're great. And then your team gets better, and then they run, hey, we're going, you know what I mean? And then with the film industry as well, you can either be dumped off a crew purely because they don't need the numbers. So you just really bide your time. But actually, I think you could probably, personally, I sometimes think you could just sit around and still be as successful. No, that's not true. I think that inevitably if you hang around long enough and you do the right thing and you have a good attitude, you will be successful. Because I got to
Okay.
say that some of it is highly technical, but none of it, we're all interdependent. So you would never be like, "Hey, you're making it on your own." We all, and if it, we sort of find an even ground almost. So sometimes you can get away with a lot of not being very talented and still go far. I guess that's true to life in a way. And then you could be super talented and go nowhere. So I think there's no hard and fast rule. I think that luck is a big thing. I think that's true with a lot of creative stuff. You just happen to be at the right place, or somebody goes, "Hey, we're going," and you're off on another journey. So it's difficult because I got to say is that I think you have to be a little bit laissez-faire and a bit nonchalant and a bit cool and a bit demanding and a bit, it's kind of finding, like any profession, you've got to, well, any profession in the industry, in the entertainment industry, I think you have to hang out, and be determined, but not be too determined. it's a fine line, isn't it? Being the guy who's staying, going, "Can I have the job? Can I have the job? Can I have the job? Can I have the job?" And then the guy who's standing around is sort of waiting at the right time to get the job. And
Right.
so I always say to people, when you're not working, don't phone somebody. It's when you're working, you should phone them, because what they know is go, "Oh, you haven't spoken to for 5 years, and suddenly you're calling me. Have you got no work?" And what you should actually is doing is when you are working, is phone and go, "Hey, I haven't seen you for 5 years. What are you up to?" You go, "Oh, I'm doing a movie," and they think, so there's no, you know what I mean? There's no pressure on you to
Yes.
employ them. You're just there and you're shooting the breeze, and it's quite nice actually. And I think that's because the industry can be a little bit vacuous sometimes, and a little bit like, "Hey, you remember me?" And I'm like, "No, you must be unemployed." And that I kind of, anyway.
Mhm.
So, you know what I mean? It's kind of like, be cool and not be. I think not be a slave to the industry. I think that's can be a little bit of a thing that everybody gets a bit too driven by it, and it's, the cart should really always be behind the horse and not the other way around. So it's a difficult, I must admit, I think it's a difficult navigation. I can see why people get into sticky situations with it in life, and
Yeah, there's a lot of questions, about the film industry, about people who are trying to break into it, because really
yeah,
that's the right term to use. Sometimes it's
yes,
breaking into it.
yes, making sure it
What
doesn't
do
break
you
you at the same time.
personally Yeah, exactly
Yeah,
right.
yeah,
What do you personally look for in, junior people that you might hire?
character, character. When they send me a CV, I go, okay, but what do you like? What do you do? What are you into? If they go, oh, I'm into surfing, or I play, I don't know, I make guitars or something that's interesting. I go, okay, because at the end of the day, we're going to be spending a lot of time together. If you can't look me in the eye, if you have no interest in life, I'm not interested in you. The rest you learn on the job. But actually, if you need to have, it's kind of character, humor, five fingers, five toes on each hand. You know what I mean? It's like all the basic things. If you're able to do the job for in so many ways, then fine. And I think a lot of people come out and it's a physicality, it's a personality, it's a spirituality, it's a technicality. It's a pretty difficult thing to sum up, but it's kind of, I always go, well, I can look them in the eyes and try and sum them up as human beings. And do I want to spend time with them? Am I going to be like bunking with this guy for 3 months in a foreign country? Am I going to be like, oh God, I just can't deal with you? And I'm not into soccer teams and beer and fast cars and stuff like that. So I'm a bit like, I don't want to be around those kind of people. Not because I don't like them. They're valid people. It's just I don't have any interest. So for me, it's partly technical. Of course, qualifications. You have to be able to know what to plug in, and et cetera, et cetera. But you learn that along the way. There's no film school that will teach you how to be an electrician. It's whether you can deal with boredom. Can you deal with stress? Are you a people person? Some of my guys who I've employed in the past and had to sack is because they're a bit too, they've got a problem at home and they're too trying to chat up the girls all the time or something. So there's distraction. It's, misogyny, there's so many things. It's like with human beings, they're unknown quantities. So it's very difficult to really gauge that first meeting. But I think if you can sit down and have a cup of coffee and a chat and sort of say, "Hey, what do you think of that?" And they go, "I don't care." Well, I'm like, "Well, I'm not really interested in them as people, so what's the point?" Do you know what I mean? It's kind of
Right.
like,
Once you do pick somebody or pick a team that you really
mm,
like, are you able
mm.
to bring them with you on other projects?
Yeah, yeah, of course, yeah. It's a bit like, it is very much a team. It's like, I think it's partly military in that sense. It's like we're going out to battle, not in the sense of it's not like we're going out to fight, but you're going onto a very, it can be a very difficult place to be. You're away from home. You have to have a structure that works and people respond to each other, and they have their foibles and they have their weaknesses, but we all go, okay, well, we understand that. We'll pick you up and help you out and all that. If it keeps happening, we maybe have to go, well, we can't do that. But yes, we take team to team. And then if you try and build that, there's a saying in the industry, you're only as good as your crew, which is true, but also, you have to be if you're on a boat or a submarine or leader of a yacht, you need to say, I know that guy when it gets stormy, he'll be able to pull it out of the hat, not cower in the corner. So you have to, that's why you build the team. So that, when you're safe because you're in trouble, they can back you up and vice versa. It's really important, actually, I
Right.
must say, a crew. And we do long hours, and you sometimes, I've had guys out and they go, oh, I really want to be in the film industry. And then after about 10 hours, they're like, looking at their watch going, I had a plan tonight. And I'm like, well, you can get rid of that idea because you don't have a plan tonight. You can leave, but, let's say you do go, oh, well, I've booked a dinner table. You're like, well, you knew it was going to be a long day. You knew You can't just leave when you want. This is not an office job. You have to be in. You have to be in. You know, and you have to be in the crew. You have to be part of the team. And if you're not part of the team, then there's no point. And there's again, there's so many different things, isn't there? Because people, their motivations are different. And some just go, want to get away from their partners. They don't want to do anything else. They just want to go out and have a good time, you know, foreign travel and all that stuff. But
Mhm.
the weaknesses, I tell you what it is. I think the weaknesses show up quite quickly. I think it's a bit like going on a boat or a spaceship or a long voyage with somebody that you're away from home. You're in a rarefied atmosphere, and you have to protect yourself and protect each other, and see yourself as a whole and as an individual at the same time. That takes a lot of. That's quite difficult for people. I think not a simple thing. You know,
Absolutely.
it's the me we
Yeah, I
thing.
think
You know.
if yeah, of
Yeah.
course.
Yeah.
I think if a young 19-year-old came up to me and said, what would be your advice if I wanted to go work with Julian?
Yeah.
I would probably tell that 19-year-old, "You know what? Go plant some trees for a while,
Yeah.
go to art
Exactly.
museums,
Exactly.
go and listen to music that you've never heard before,
Yeah.
and,
Yeah. Explore. You
and
know,
I think
and don't be
explore,
afraid.
yeah.
You know, and also be. You know, I know it's a bit of a. But be yourself. Just be strong. You know, just know yourself. I think that's the thing for me. I didn't hit the film industry till I was 30 years old. I'd been through a lot of stuff in my life, and I was just at the right space. Right, I knew where I'd come from, and I knew sort of where I was going, but I didn't have. I had. I kind of had. I'd gained character in my life, and I was at the right time, and I was a bit more opinionated and a bit more secure in myself. So I'd go when people said, "What do you think?" I wasn't like, I already had an opinion. I already in my mind was going, "This is what I think." So when they asked me, I didn't have to think about it. I just went, "Oh, I don't like it, or I like this, or yes, you should do this." And actually, that's always stayed with me because sometimes I'm standing there watching the cameraman and the director, you know, of some experience lining up a shot, and they'll be going, "Oh, what do you think?" And I'll go in my head, I'll go 22 millimeter, and I'll go 22, and they'll go, "Yes, 22," and I go, or they'll go, 150 mil lens, and I go, "No, that's not right," in my head. And then they look at it and go, "No, that's not right." And I kind of, and that gives me succor in a way. It gives me, okay, oh well, I must be on the same page. I'm on the right thing. I'm trusting my instinct, and I think that's actually part of the thing is trusting your instinct and trusting yourself that you're right. But I'd say what it is. Be honest to yourself and be a whole person, and as much as you can be. And you're still learning, still growing, all that stuff. But don't pretend you're something you're not because that won't work. And yeah, explore yourself more than else. Because actually, I think that's what it's about, really. The rest is just
Yeah,
meh.
absolutely.
It's a movie. It's like it's just going to disappear one day.
Well, I mean, I think there's also the wow factor, right? I mean, we
Yeah,
grow up with and are constantly bombarded by entertainment,
yeah,
by
yeah. Big time.
celebrities
Yeah.
and celebrity life and stuff. And so I think a lot of people go into it thinking they're going to become celebrities or get to work with celebrities, etc.
Yes.
Um, did that impact you at all? Did you go into it with them? When you started working with really well-known people,
Yeah.
does that affect you in any way?
Yes, of course. Because I think I'd be a. Well, I think I would be a bit. What's the word? Not non-human, but I wouldn't be. I grew up with films, like you say, and my dad was into movies, and my dad talked about Peter O'Toole, for instance. And here's a big thing, actually. My dad, who passed away before I got into the movies, was a great movie buff, and he was an influence on me in that sense. And he was so into like Lawrence of Arabia, and Marathon Man, and Deer Hunter, and not Goodfellas, The Godfather, and classic films that went back, Citizen Kane, all this stuff, blah blah blah. And it goes on and on and on. So it already gone into my head, and then one day I got a film, and I'm working with Peter O'Toole, and I was just like, wow, wow, that's a classic man. That's not your just Joe Schmo. He's not. He's the real deal. And I kind of it really, yeah, you get a bit starstruck, it's kind of not in a way that, I can't talk to him. I just go, "Wow, I'm standing oh, here I am," and the connection with all the other people that he's worked with, that's the other thing, is you go 6 degrees of separation. Here I am with Daniel Craig before he was Bond, and then you go, "Oh, yeah, da, da, da," and Peter O'Toole and Johnny Depp and Michelle Pfeiffer, and kind of, it just goes on in the sense of you go, "Wow, I'm in a different mycelium," the reach, the web and they're just normal people, but they're not because they're magnified through the cinema. But I quite like that. I think there's part of me is a bit not this translates into American or Canadian, but tarty. It's like yeah, it's quite nice to be around celebrities. Who wouldn't? It's nice to be. There's an air about it which I quite like. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of I get that romance
Yeah,
and glamour and
absolutely.
all that. We were hanging out with George Clooney. It's like that's not bad. not a bad day's work, when you kinda go and we're not like, "Hey, we're George Clooney," but it's kind of, there's a nice it's like it's better than going to work and going, "What'd you do today?" Go, "Well," I'd rather be I think since I was a kid, I was always behind the scenes. Does that make sense? I was always in the other side of the frame, and I've always thought that when I worked in music, I was always doing backstage stuff. When I worked in, I'm always the guy who was practical, and I get the whole traveling through the frame. I kind of quite like that thing where I can go in and out of it. And one day I'm watching it, and the next day I'm in it. I'm a satellite of the industry, and I don't want to be a celebrity, or that's quite hard work in a way. Well, it's it's prosperous, but it's not, emotionally quite unstable place. I kind of quite like that. They're sort of modern day artists in a way. In the 30s it would have been Picasso or something like that, and now it's Johnny Depp. And they kind of have that air about them, which is slightly different for whatever reason. I quite like that.
Yeah, I mean, the coolest part in my opinion is that you get to work with people who are absolute masters of their craft when it comes to actors. I
Yes.
remember watching a whole little mini documentary on Anthony Hopkins in Westworld and
Yeah. Yeah.
how, even every little gesture he
Yes.
made had a
Absolutely.
purpose, had a
Absolutely.
reason for being there.
Absolutely.
So it's kind of cool that you
Yeah.
get
Yeah.
to
Big
see
time.
this in action.
Yeah, big time. I think my problem with it is you get slightly false. It's a false world, which I found difficult to come to terms with once. I think, or over the time, you kind of go, "Oh, we're all buddies," and you go, "No, you're not actually. He's going to get in his car and go to his multi-million-pound mansion," and
Yeah, that's true.
it's a bit like, I don't know how to describe it. You're a voyeur of it, and you're a partaker and a creator within it, but you're not actually in it. So you're in this kind of weird, and I think that really affects people. Actually, sometimes they can get a bit starstruck in the sense of they're like, "Oh yeah, I work in the movies," and I'm like, "Yeah, but you're just, with all due respect, you're a plasterer on a set that works in the movies. It's just, it's keeping it real. At the end of the day, I go home, I haven't got, do you know what I mean? It's kind of like you need the grounding."
Yeah.
Whereas, and it's great and it's like exciting, but then at the end of the day, it's and then what struck me at once, well not once, but when I started out, is you work and you hard, and it's like you build this whole thing, and then they finish shooting, and then they just take it all away, and you walk in on the last day, and it's an empty room, and it's kind of a sad thing, and then it gets filtered and made and produced and edited and post production into this little box on a DVD shelf. You know what I mean? You go, wow, all that effort went into that thing, and it's a memory, and it's quite interesting. That's quite a not psychological and a metaphysical, on a metaphysical level, quite an interesting thing. It's like an author living their whole life, and all that information and experience and thing went into words, and it's just diluted, not diluted, refined and made into something. And it's kind of weird. The after effect of this is a weird thing. Do you know what I mean? It's like coming home from a long journey and getting home, and you just go, "Phew, that was hard." It was exciting. It was full. It was a full experience, and you can't quite
Yeah,
understand
this is
what
something
get your head around it.
This is something a friend of mine, Sandrine Lafont, who I'm going to interview a bit
Mm,
later in the year, but
mm,
she experienced this. She was a dancer with Céline Dion for 10 years, and
mm,
then she worked with Cirque du Soleil, and at
mhm.
one point, we were talking, and I said, "What does it feel like to work on a project for 4 to 6 months? You
Yep,
have a whole team, you have,
yep,
a really tight team of
yep,
dancers or
yep,
producers, whatever,
yep.
and then you all leave.
Yes,
You all leave. You don't see
yeah,
these people
yeah,
again for maybe another 3,
yeah,
4
and
years."
you have a
And
collective
it's
experience, yeah,
weird.
yeah. But that's
Yeah,
military,
you have
the
a
military,
exactly.
they go on tour, everybody's like, "Hey," and it's a but whatever, I'm being a bit, Hollywood about it, but you all have to go through difficult times, and you're away from your home, da, 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 and then you come back, and you're sitting in your house with your child or whatever, and it's you kind of connected to your brain is no, your spirit in a way is connected somewhere else. Not in a bad way, but you don't have your collective experience with your family and your wife or husband or whatever is so different to the experience you've had with your colleagues. And it's not you've just gone to the office, it's you've gone on a journey, and it is very difficult. And the blues come very strongly after that. And that's another thing about guys is when you meet them, you go, listen, this is going to be a ride and it's going to be a great adventure. But however the highs, there's going to be a lot of lows as well. For all the hanging out on film sets and being cool, you will also find there's an empty space there, and it can be quite massive. And you have to be careful you don't fill it up with something else. It's not good for you. It's a bit of a roller
How do you
coaster.
deal with it?
Well, I think I'm quite strong. I grew up in all different countries and worlds and stuff like that. I found it difficult at first, but in the end, recently I started meditating and stuff like that. I was never into drugs or drink particularly. I was never a big gambling or whatever. It was never. So I never felt that I had a big vacuum inside, and I kind of got it. I think I was a bit like again behind the stage. I used to do theatre. You'd spend all day working on the set and designing a concert or whatever, and then you pack all the shit away, and everybody goes home, and you just hear the audience. Do you know what I mean? It's like the memory of it, the phantasm of it, lasts longer in your mind than in reality. So of course, when you've cleaned up the stage and everybody's gone and said goodbye or gone out for a drink or whatever, there's the echo of that, and you just have to hold on to that a little bit. And there's something quite nice about it actually. I think I'm quite into bittersweet in a way. I quite like that. I think it's part of life. I think it's you can't have one without the other. Bitter wouldn't make any sense without the sweetness. So you have to accept both. Light without, there's no light
Right.
without dark. And I think that's a big problem within our society to a certain extent. Everybody wants light and they don't want the dark. Go, well,
Of course,
you
yeah.
can't. There's no no
How do
contrast.
you maintain a relationship with all
But
that?
with my partner, you mean?
Yeah, like
Uh,
how does anybody, maintain a relationship when they're away for 4 to
well, I
6
think you have
months
to be
at a
an adult.
time?
It's never easy, and you grow up. I've been together. Christina just celebrated 28 years together. It's a long journey. That's old enough to be grandparents, and you have to talk to each other. You have to give and take. You're both unknown quantities, and you have to grow and share and all those things. Obvious, and you have to listen to each other, of course, and speak your mind and take time. And it's difficult. Again, it's like you're off on location with people, and they're all like, "Oh, come on, we'll go to the drink," and you'll have to take. And we haven't got children even, but if you had children, you've got to spend 20 minutes, half an hour with your children on Skype or on the phone or in the old days, people didn't have that, so you would just go away for 3 months and never see them and then come back, and that's where people get a little bit lost, I think. But, it was difficult, I must admit, when we first and then now Christina and I travel together, so where I go, she goes with me, which is great.
Oh,
So
that's
we've be
amazing. I didn't know
yeah.
that actually.
No, and it's a really good
Just
I think it's solved, so many problems, and we're lucky because we don't have children to worry about, but I think it's been a blessing. And Christina's she's I always I say she's a bit like a cat, although she's allergic to them. She's quite happy. We went to Malaysia for 3 months on a movie, Crazy Rich Asians, and she gets the benefit of a nice hotel in Kuala Lumpur. She has a spa. She gets to know the people in the hotel, and she can have room service, or she can go out for a walk, or then there's the other partners come in and they spend time together and they build their own little community. And then she gets to hang out with me and the director or the actors in the evening, so she meets that lot, so she doesn't have to she's met Clooney twice, and it's kind of he's like, do you know what I mean? So she in a way gets the thrill rather than the hard work. I have to do the hard work
yeah,
and
but
spend the time, but
you
in a
also
different way.
get to, yeah, you also get to collapse in her arms after a
Well,
long day,
exactly,
which is beautiful.
exactly. And when you come home from, you jump off a minibus and come home, the person you love opens the door, not it's an empty room. And it's not and then I don't have to go, "Hey, we're all going for a drink. Let's go for a drink." I go, "No, it's fine. Me and Christina are going for a walk, and we'll have dinner, or we'll meet up together and or we'll hang out with a different department, or, their partner somebody else's partner will come and we'll go and we all go out together and we have couples out." And I love it, actually, I must admit. It's also difficult when you come home from a long, hard day when you go, "How was it?" And you're like, "Oh, I just wanna go to bed." But that's in a relationship. If you came home from a long, hard day at work in your own home, you'd still have the same problem. So it's just
Right,
being it's and she loves traveling. We love being in different places. We love experiencing different things. So you have to have that if you're not into that, then well, traveling is not going to help you. And she, we were in Malta on the end. We just finished shooting Murder on the Orient Express. Christina was with me. We said, "Oh, it's our last day here. We'll go to the it's a side thing, but we went to the cathedral to see the Caravaggio painting there." And as I was going in, I got a call to go to Malaysia, and I was like, "What do you think?" And she goes, "Ah, why not? We'd love to go to Asia." So I emailed back and said, "I'm interested." And then 2 weeks later, we're on a plane to Malaysia. Well, a lot of people would be like, "Well, hold on a sec. We were planning to go to Venice for a holiday or somewhere else." And so everything just got thrown out the window, and we were on a plane to Malaysia, and we didn't come back till
wow.
July. So you kind of go, "Wow, that's kind of quite a," and I love that. That's so exciting. It's like, oh, everything's changed, but you have to be prepared to just you know, move, ditch, go. But I grew up like that, so in a way, it was for me, it's not a big challenge. And she likes the thrill of it. And I think that helps the relationship go along because it's always like you're always having to adapt and change, and we like that. I think you have to respect
Yeah,
other
you said,
people's, place. That's the thing.
absolutely. I mean, it sounds like you guys are a perfect partnership in that
Well, there's
regard.
no, yeah.
You said, you grew up like that. Do you wanna touch on that for a bit? Just,
Well, my
tell
dad,
me a little bit.
my dad. So I was born in England in Amersham, which is a small town out. Well, it's small town outside of London. Only because my parents were there. My dad was doing his qualifications to become part of the diplomatic service. So at 2 months old, we moved to Senegal, to West Africa. My three older brothers. My mum's Italian. She's from Italy, from Florence. And again, 1966, my mum went okay, and we moved to India, to Africa. 3 years later, we went to Stockholm. 3 years after that, we went to Bombay. So again, huge cultural change and continental change. I mean, you're not only going from a very different world in the sense of, but a different atmosphere in the sense of climate and s- you know, you're not going from one Christian country to another Christian country with a similar. You're doing a huge, very different, diverse experiences, and you have to cope with that, and that's quite difficult. I remember we flew from Stockholm to India. Stockholm's an underpopulated country, very clean, very white, and you suddenly end up in Bombay after a 20-hour flight or whatever it is, going, "Oh my god, this is not what I." It's just you're shell shocked constantly. You have to leave your family, your friends every time, or I'd never had long term friends, so you grow up like that, and that took me a while to get too used to. But then you get immersed in this amazing culture, which you then, and you don't have long term objects in your life. Everything has to be ditched, and you go. And it keeps you fluid, and it's difficult because obviously when you do stop, it's like driving off a motorway. Your brain is still going, but your body has stopped, and you kind of. That took me a long time to settle down. I'm actually quite homely. I'm, quite like being at home, but I also love that just shaking it up. I think it's really important, and I think we suffer too much in crisis. I think we need to go, oh my god, it's all falling apart, and you go, yes, but because it's falling apart, that means something's about to be rebuilt. It's evolving, it's changing. Don't, everything is in flux all the time, including us. We're not here forever. So just let it roll a bit. And I suffer from it. I'm a bit like, oh, but I also, part of me goes, well, that's where it's always going to be. The only constant is change, and allow that to happen. Let's not stress too much about that, roll with it a little bit. Because actually,
Yeah, it sounds like
everything comes to
you're
pass.
born with a sense of optimism, aren't you?
My mum always said I used to wake up very happy, which I like. I love potential. I think I like going to shops where I like tool shops and art shops because all the potential of the stuff that you could possibly do with that. I go, wow, that's just brilliant. All that stuff. And it's not produced. It's like, this is where we produce it. This is will give me the day will be better because I've done that. And since I had cancer, I'm less waking up in a happier mood. I get a bit maudling, but that's where the meditation came in. But I'm quite spiritual. I quite like I think you tune into stuff, and I kind of like the whole. I like, I like cultures. I'm always curious. I always go, "Where are you from? What do you do? How do you do it there? How do you say this? What's your food like?" And I think that's a better than, "Oh, I don't like that." I'd rather be optimistic and open and positive than negative and closed and, um, unwilling to find out. It's also brought me into difficult places sometimes where you become a bit, not suspect, but you become, what's the word? You become a bit, being open can be quite difficult because you have to accept, you become fair game, I guess, to other people. They're like, huh, well, he's a bit easy, isn't he?
Mhm.
Because he wants, but they all, I don't know. I don't really want to hide. I don't have stuff to hide in that sense. I can go, why do you want to know? I just and of course you can get screwed over by that, but that's the thing.
Of course. It's
That,
one of the things I've always, enjoyed about our, our correspondence and stuff like
yeah,
that is that you're very curious, you're very,
yeah,
interesting and interested
yes.
in
Well,
all
you know what
sorts
they
of
say about
things.
curiosity,
Yeah,
as in cats.
exactly,
No,
right?
but yes, I want to be. Otherwise, what's the point?
Yeah. You did mention in one of our last conversations that one of the things that was of particular interest to you
Mm.
is the more spiritual side to light and
Yeah,
lighting. You want
yeah.
to tell me a little bit about that?
Well, I guess it's what I touched on before is that, in life, I think that I think, well, it's a Judeo Christian thing, I think, and people can contradict this, but obviously, in my mind, it's like that, there's somehow light is all optimistic and positive, and it's, life has to be about lightness and beauty and all that. And it's always like it has to be about the good, and you have to accept to a certain extent in life that it's about the bad. So if we equate that to light being good and dark being bad, well, I kind of go, well, you can't have one without the other. So you either, if everything is bright and beautiful and light, it's kind of like you meet those people and go, oh, everything has to be amazing. Not amazing in the sense of, but I only see the positive. And I go, well, there is negative in the world, but you have to accept it as part of it's the bittersweet thing. And so light being the sweet and dark being the bitter, or vice versa. Traditionally we see it like that. But actually, light is a life giver essentially, because it creates growth, and it allows cells to grow, and plants to grow, and the planet to grow, and heat and all those things. But if it was constantly like that, it wouldn't be able to grow. So in a way, life needs dormancy, and life needs time to settle, and life needs time to go shut down and sleep and all that side kind of thing. And I think, I love the fact that I work with light because it's organic. It's not something that follows traditional rules. It follows certain rules within physics, but actually it doesn't as well. Is light bent? Is time bent by light? Or all those things. It's a metaphysical thing as much as anything else, and I find that as fascinating. Then I really don't care the technology of it. I find it more about what light does when it falls on subjects, and and then there's light from inside. You know what I mean? It's everywhere. It's energy. And I think, and I'm not an airy fairy person in that sense. I'm not, but I just kind of go, that's more interesting to me. How, like, when you feel there's a certain feeling when you get up and the sun is shining, you just feel the potential, there's positivity that things are going to grow with it. And I live in a country which doesn't have a lot of sunlight like you would get in Spain or Italy. So my thing is that when I grew up in hot countries and I'd come to England, I found it deeply miserable. I found people miserable, and I found it. But when the sun comes out, everybody's like, oh, they go a bit crazy. And I find that quite interesting. And I was always like, well, for me, it's like when I see sun in the morning, I see the positivity of things. But having recognized that is that, to have contrast in life, you need shadow and light. You have actually there's a Joni Mitchell song, and I can't remember what the title of it is, but it is, every picture has a shadow and every picture has some source of light, blindness and sight. And I think you don't appreciate one without the other, let's say. And I think when you turn on that big lamp and shine it onto the actor, it's like something comes alive. And when you turn it off, that thing doesn't disappear. It's still there, but do you know what I mean? It becomes dormant. And I think that's quite interesting. And I think we should embrace the shadow and embrace the contrast in life instead of just saying, oh, we want it all to be good, 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 good. I think it's very bad actually for society. A bit like what's going on politically in the world. It's like, yes, there's bad shit going down, but also through that will become good stuff will happen. And you can't just go, oh, we don't want, the life is not modulated at that point. You can't have the sound always on. Silence has as much validity as noise, and vice versa.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we see this a lot in art history,
Yes.
right? We see a
Yeah.
lot of artwork where you mentioned Caravaggio,
Yeah.
who was a master of
Yeah.
light.
Yeah.
I think of things like Francis Bacon with the distorted portraits
Yep.
that exposed the
Yep.
grotesque
Yep.
side of
Yep.
life.
Yeah.
How has the fine arts, how have visual arts influenced your work?
Well, I think visual arts is a process is very interesting. I think that when you start a painting, for instance, it's not, if uh, once you start, so you start with, you don't even maybe start with an idea. You start with a thing, a surface, and it might already have marks on it, and then you add your mark, and then you take that on a journey, and you may not necessarily know where that ends up. You're part of the process. You're the controller to a certain extent, but then there's other immutable forces like gravity and things like that you can't control. So you put a big blob of paint on the bottom, and of course it's going to run to the top, and it's going to run to the bottom. Well, you can control that because you can flatten it and all that. So in a way, filmmaking is a bit like that. I think that painting for me shows me a way of life. It's a way of a method that you do in life, a bit like cooking. And do you know what I mean? It's like you have to go through certain things. You can put them in different orders, but will have a different effect. So you can, people go, oh, you can't mix oil and water, oil paint and water paint. You go, yes, you can. Of course you can. You can do whatever you want, but it won't it won't work for you. So you have to accept that to a certain extent and work with it and maybe have an interesting effect. So it's kind of like you can do whatever you want. I always say to people, you can make whatever meal you want, however you want to do it. You can do whatever painting you want. There's no limit. You can do it until it falls apart, whatever. And the only thing that really matters is whether you like it. If somebody else likes it, then fine. But really, it's up to you. And I think that's to a certain extent, we're all trying to prove a thing to somebody else. Going, what do you think? And you go, well, it's not really what you think. It's what I think. Even down to food. You can put, I don't know what the worst combination of food could possibly be, and everybody goes, "You're crazy," and you go, "Well, I like it," and everybody goes, "You know what? He's got a point. I quite like it." And then if enough people like it, then you're on to a winner. If you keep putting those two ingredients together and everybody hates it, then you probably should give up. If you're trying to make a living out of it or whatever, you're trying to catch on. If you're into that, then that's fine. And I think painting's quite a fascinating. I love the fact that it's not a joint effort because I do everything as a collaboration, and I love the fact that it's just me. It doesn't have to be, obviously. And I like that thing of just that it's art can be such an amazing thing, and whatever you think about it intellectually, people respond to music and paintings and things like that, and architecture and stuff. They have opinions, and I do feel like it encourages something in their personality or their spirituality that's very important. I think without it, it's kind of the art life would be a bit dead. And it's interesting that certain cultures or political ethoses like Nazism and Stalinism, communism will try and destroy and control art because they see it as whatever, because they know that it is quite important to people. And if they didn't want to control it, then they knew if it wasn't important to people and it wasn't relevant to their life and their optimism, et cetera, why would they want to control it, And I think what's going on in the
Right.
world today is like, it's information, but it's a different kind of information.
I
Mhm.
wanted to be clear just before you continued here is that, you are a painter, you also
Yes.
paint. It's
Yeah.
something that I didn't mention earlier, but,
No, no.
you the and this is why you're able to say that this is
Yeah.
something you can do as an individual
Yes.
outside of the film
Yes.
world.
Yes.
So, yeah, tell me more, just a little bit more about what it is that you
Well,
paint.
I paint landscapes at the moment. I started out weirdly doing landscapes, but only by accident because I was in Italy and my mum's Italian. Somebody gave me some oil paints. I went out with my my mother's mother's neighbor, to paint in the society in the countryside in Tuscany, which sounds slightly idealized. But I then, went into through my career of 30, 40 years, I guess, of nearly 40 years of painting, I've gone through many different things. And I paint not as a professional, I paint as an amateur, but it's because I don't, I've sold stuff. I mean, Kristen Bale's actually got one of my paintings in his house in Los Angeles, but I don't, that wasn't my MO was not to go out and sell paintings. My MO is because I like creating images. There's something that's just instinctual in me. So the film industry allows me to do that to a certain extent, but then it won't allow me to have control over it. So that's why I paint for myself. And I just have always been into color and light and shape, and I respond very much to those things. And I don't like to intellectualize it too much in the sense of because I think it destroys it. But it's a bit like food. I just go, oh, food is the same thing. It's got color and taste and flavor, and it's satisfying, and it allows you to live. And I think the painting's always been that to me since I was a 10-year-old, whatever. You start out drawing when you're a kid, but then there's something. I think it's a circle actually. I think it's a loop, and if you like it and you do it, and everybody goes, "Oh, that's nice," and then you respond to that, and then you like it. It goes round and round, and it's like need, feed, breed. It's like that eat or hunger, cook, taste, eat. Hunger to it goes round, and it just keeps going around. If you just improve on it as you go around, and it feeds something inside of you, and it can not feed it as well. It can be very frustrating as well. But I guess it's again, going to that exhibition today, I was like, oh, it inspired me to do some more stuff because you get a bit like meh, and because I don't get paid for it, there's no reason to do it apart from my enjoyment. And I haven't painted for a
Do you
month
think that
now.
that's if you weren't a gaffer, do you think that
Mm.
you would paint for a living?
Yes. I think that ideally, if I could survive financially as a painter, I would definitely do that. And that's my dream, I guess, in the future to retire from filmmaking and or do less maybe and become a painter. And I'm already doing that to a certain extent. And as you get older, your money you don't need so much money, and you can take time, and you have different interests. But yes, I'm very much into that. I think my problem is that I would have done it. I kind of started doing it, and that before I got into the film industry, I wanted to just be exclusive an artist. And I didn't like. I went to art galleries and I didn't like them. I was like, I don't really want to be part of that people. I didn't feel a kinship with them. And the film industry, I certainly did. I felt very much more involved, and I felt like that at art college. Actually, when I went to art college, I didn't like it. I like painting, but I didn't want to be involved with the art crew. And I need a buffer, really, somebody to sort of take my stuff and go with it and say, this. And I think it's also very difficult to be the agent of self. I think, for artists, find it very difficult to be the guy who comes in and goes, yeah, this guy's great. You really need to buy this guy's stuff. He's great, or they're great, and you need somebody to represent you in that sense. And that's where I think artists flourish to a certain extent. They have a somebody to represent them, and they're successful because I think it's finding a balance between your own passion, your own success, and then also convince or not caring so much and just let somebody else decide. And luckily, if you're a Picasso or somebody like you've got a great amount of talent and you're very successful, or you're Jeff Koons and you're talented to a certain extent, but then are very good at self promotion.
Right. And so I guess it is a the bonus of being a painter is that you get to
Mm.
do it individually, like you had
Yes,
previously said that
yes,
when you're a gaffer, you're working as part of a team. But
yes,
like you just said, also you're on your own when it comes to your own promo until you get an agent. And
yeah,
it's a completely the art world is a completely different sense of elitism,
yeah,
and really,
and
it's
also
it's
and also
very different.
yeah, and also it's subjective. At the end of the day, you're going, "Do you like that?" And you go, "Yeah, it's interesting." And if somebody's like, "I want to spend," but I think that the thing is that artists don't do that. I maybe am too sensitive. I'm maybe too worried about what people think of me in that sense. I'm not a natural, exponent of my own self, and which is sad to say. I think in a way, in the film industry, I can hide that to a certain extent. I can be, people go, "Great movie," and I go, "Well, I didn't do it on my own." So if it's terrible, I don't go, "Well, it wasn't my fault." Do you know what I mean? It's like you can partake in the
Yeah.
success and not partake in the failure equally. So everybody goes, "Oh, you were the accountant on Game of Thrones, amazing," and you go, "Yeah, well, I never went on set. I was just an accountant." But of course, success has many fathers, and failure is always an orphan. So, and as a painter, it would strike when people go, "Yeah." I'd rather have. I think indifference is the thing I don't like in the industry. And when I first started going to art galleries, they're like, "Well, I like this one. Do you have any more like that?" And I kind of went, "Well, I'm not a. I don't do it to taste, but I don't know. I'm not. I don't know. It's not a. It's just one of those things that didn't quite. That I guess the seed at the time didn't quite take to the soil, and it wasn't right. And therefore, I found the thing that was right, which gave me sustenance. But as I've grown older now, would like to change that maybe a little bit and see, and that's why I
Yeah.
did my website and started doing stuff, which is not, it's a bad timing because the world is in massive recession. So maybe art's not the first thing on their minds, but I'm glad I did it. And that's again, it's not, I'm not doing it for money, but it's certainly if you don't put it out there, if you don't put your wares on the table, people aren't interested. They're certainly not going to pick them up for financially or any other way. So you have to get them out.
There are 2 aspects, like you're saying, to art, which
Mm.
is
Mm.
you do it to share,
Yes.
as a because what was the point of expression if you just keep it to
Yes.
yourself? And
Yes.
then the other point is perhaps to make a
Yes.
little bit of
Yeah. Of
money
course.
here and there.
Yeah. Well, we have to pay the mortgage and all that stuff. Yeah.
Of
And also,
course.
I don't believe in a starving artist. I don't want to go through life starving and stressed about how I find the next. Oh, equally, I don't. I think most of the art that's made by people who are incredibly wealthy is just pretty crap. You need to have.
Yeah.
Again, it goes back to the bittersweet. You need to have in your life some constant test of what it is, whether it's psychologically, spiritually, physically, economically. You need to have something that constantly makes you want to strive to better things. And, again, politically, Trump or whatever, whoever you don't like is there for a reason for you to push harder. We've created it. It's an ebb and flow, and I think you have to, it's a life journey. And really, art, I think, is a byproduct of your life, and that's why a lot of Western art it's very boring because we've seen it. It's kind of reached its end. Whereas if you went to Africa or Asia or Siberia, you probably find much more interesting art, or Lebanon or Palestine. you'd find art in a very different way because it's got such a different meaning. It's so much more crucial to them. There's so, it's a bit like if you're in prison and you can still produce a drawing from blood or, a piece of charcoal that somebody's smuggled. You know what I mean? It's like if you still have that urgency and thing to draw out against all odds, then you're a proper artist as far as I'm concerned. Whereas if you're super wealthy and you've got a house with loads of, I saw it was a famous actor, and you go into a studio and he's got just everything you could possibly want as an artist, but his art is really boring. So it's self-indulgent, and I kind of so you
Right.
have to, it has to have there has to always be something to make the light lighter and the dark darker. Otherwise, there's no solidity. There's no you need contrast. And I think that's the thing that keeps striking. You wake up in the morning and hope that the day is going to be sunny and bright and strong, and it's not going to piss down, and you're not going to get soaking wet or whatever, or your house isn't going to get set fire to by a wildfire. It's going to find a balance and find some harmony. But if you don't, what do? You can't return. You can't go backwards. So you always have to go forward, and that kind of spurs you on. And what I would say is that I think great art actually comes through struggle. It doesn't come through boredom. It doesn't come through, "Yeah, it's great."
So, Julian, I'm really curious now. What is it inside of you that is prompting you to create art?
Interesting question, actually, because partly I guess it must be, to a certain extent, self-promotion, not I don't know, I started growing flowers recently, and there's no point to it, but I just quite like flowers. I like coloring, I've always done like that. I've always been like, I like expressing. I think I would have been a musician if I wasn't a painter, I kind of like that thing of just noodling. I like being busy. I like, I like doing stuff. And I think
Is there
art and
something inside of you, though, that you're trying to release, like something that you wanna say or something that you're,
well, that's the problem is
a
I think
conflict you're
recently I've to be no, I kind of I no, I really don't. I don't have I struggle to go, oh, I want to because I want to impress upon the world my belief. I'm not like that. I find I struggle to I think I have enough confidence to do that generally. I know what I don't want, I guess, but I don't know what I do want. But I love landscapes and I love nature. I don't it's just more like, here it is. It's kind of acceptance and of that. I never paint people. That's one thing. I've never drawn people ever. I did life drawing stuff, but I never subjective. I never go, oh, here's somebody doing something. And I kind of wish I could actually, but I never really wanted to. I've never had an urgency to. I'm more like just like shapes and colors, and I think that's why abstract art interests me more. I have, yeah, even when I was a teenager, when I really got into painting, when I was at school, we'd go out and draw landscapes. I loved them. I like empty frames in a way. I like those things, but I don't know really. I think it's, I think about it. Actually, I do think about it a lot. I go, why aren't you politically? Why aren't you doing paintings about? I have ideas for stuff, but they never seem to come to fruition about that. I kind of, I'm not into agitprop. I'm not into sort of this is the way things should be. I'm not into, but I kind of, when I saw the paintings today, I get why maybe it's laziness. I don't know why people do that, but I kind of like the idea of just seeing a landscape and going, maybe that's the thing of when changing my life so much that I miss those opportunities of recording, that there's a lot of missed opportunities in my life where I've suddenly gone, well, I didn't, my parents suddenly moved me to another continent. So I'm like, "Ugh," there's a kind of a missed, like a landscape that I never got to really see properly kind of thing. Does that make sense? It's kind of like a
Yeah, so it
missed
sounds
vision.
like you've got a longing, a bit of a longing.
Yeah, I think I suffer a little bit from what's the word or the phrase is abandonment in that sense, where I lost. I had to leave my friends. I had to leave my culture. I had to leave. Well, it wasn't my culture, somebody else's. But I then was kind of you become detached a little bit, and I think I suffered a little bit from me or not commitment because I was scared of that we were just going to leave. And I think maybe I tell you what it is actually. There is something I think is that it's that thing of a bit like I was saying about the film industry. Is at the end of the day, when all that disappears and they shut the stage door, and then somebody else turns up the next day and opens the stage door and builds their own reality. Is that's great, but that's not my reality. That's created by a director or a studio or whatever. Julian White exists. I sometimes look at my painting and go, when I die, when I'm no longer here, that they will exist and they'll be the mark of, you go into the caves of southern France or Spain, and you look at those drawings by people who didn't do it for a reason particularly, but of antelope or people, there's a fetishism about it. And then you go, well, why do they do it? Because I was here, it was that I exist. Therefore, when I'm gone, something will exist that was me only and not anybody else. And I think that must be important to me because I think I shared everything
Mm,
with my brothers, I shared everything with my family, I shared everything with other people, and I always struggled to find my own thing. I always went from one country to another, from one school system to another, from one, and just in that you sort of, to a certain extent, maybe get lost by it, lost from it or within it. And I kind of want to maybe go, here I am. This is me. Whether it doesn't say anything about me in that sense, there's no like big, dramatic, angst-ridden thing. It's just somebody standing in a landscape looking at something, and it's all fantasy. It's not even a landscape that I've stood in. It's totally from my head, and I kind of like that. I think that's it's kind of science fiction in that sense. It's kind of not of this world. It's from inside my brain, and it's just the little journey that I've been on with that painting on that in that time. And somebody will look at it and go, "Ah," or not. I don't know, but that's really unimportant for me. It's the important thing. It's an engraving, I guess, an etching. It's more than
yeah.
just an
It sounds
empty
like
space.
it's a way to be remembered.
Yeah, and I go through. I think people go, oh, I have kids so that they'll look after me, whatever. And I don't. I understand that, but I don't have a sentimental attitude about it. I'm not somebody. I kind of go, that I've got this sort of legacy to pass on to somebody. I don't. I really don't feel that. I don't. I think we exist in a world, and not in a cynical way. I think we exist in a world totally interdependent on each other more than ever. But also that you have to remember that you are the only person in your world. Do you know what I mean?
Mhm.
It's not, and that's not cynical at all. It's like saying I recognize that I am the center of my own universe because you can't be the center of somebody else's universe in yourself. You can only be the center of your own universe, and then you can only respond to the other universes around you by being the center of you have to be your own nucleus because otherwise you cease to
Right.
exist. And I think to a certain extent, art is part of that. It's saying I am, you know, I exist. And I always thought actually whether the word art comes from, where art thou kind of thing. It's kind of why is it? I don't know. There probably is nothing in that, but it's kind of like I am, I exist, ecce homo kind of thing. And I think that's quite interesting. But I do think it's a byproduct. It's nothing more than that, you know,
Hmm.
like food is or knitting or whatever. You do it because it keeps you occupied and fulfills part of you. And at the end of the day, somebody goes, that was great or not, or I like that sandwich or I didn't like that sandwich. But there's no, at the end of the day, we all die. And, all the other shit that people talk about art is really just superfluous because
Yeah.
it really is. I mean, you know, you're a scientist partly, aren't you? You kind of get into that whole thing of, you know, antelope don't think about art. They just think about what they can eat and how they, maintaining the
Yeah, it's weird being at the intersection, between being a visual artist myself, but
yes,
then being in the science
yeah,
community as a science
yeah,
communicator. So it's been really weird examining that whole question.
yeah,
So Julian, I have one last question
yeah,
for you.
sure.
Do you prefer the light of the sunrise or the light of the sunset?
Oh, good question. Well, Light of Sunset is full of melancholy uh and the day has passed, the remains of the day, and sunrise is full of the opportunity and the excitement of what's happening. And we're still alive. Yay. That thing of like, oh, the sun will always rise. Well, maybe it won't one day, but it's like, the I think it's Thailand, they clap the sunset when it goes down. It's like, thank you for the day. And I quite like that, but also there's a bit of a fear in it. It's like, what's going to happen at night? Or what's, there in that there traditionally would be danger because you can't see into the jungle or into the wilderness. Whereas where light comes, it's very. I got to say, in between. I like both of them. I just don't like midday. It's neither here nor there, and it's traditionally the
Nobody
worst.
likes midday.
It's traditionally the worst light. It's like it's all
Yeah.
toppy, so nobody looks good, and you're better off sleeping through that. I think the Spanish have it right.
Yeah, the siesta is
Yeah.
definitely the
Yeah,
right,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
cultural process to
But no,
have.
I think low light is always the better because it shows up all the texture.
Cool. Well, listen, Julian, it's been fantastic to have
Likewise.
this conversation
Thank
with
you.
you, despite the many disconnections that we've
Yeah.
had. Hopefully, the
Well,
viewers won't notice a thing.
no, editing.
And yeah, so listen, it's been great,
Thank you.
and I support. I hope that your future projects go well.
Yeah,
I
thank
hope
you.
that you keep painting.
Yep, I will.
And do you want to share with everybody where they can see your paintings?
Yeah, it's quite simple. julianwhiteart.com.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Julian, for coming to the podcast, and
Yeah.
I hope that you continue to be well.
Oh, thank you. Oh, one more thing. I have an
Yes.
Instagram account which is blood and color 66, which is my paintings. And then through that you can link to I have 5 different Instagram accounts. You can find all my other stuff.
Yes, that's right. And I highly recommend following. Also, Julian's portraits of flowers are just stunning.
Oh, thank you.
So definitely have a look at that.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Jules.
All
Take
right.
care.
Thank you.
Bye.